All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. A record-setting 17 billion US dollars were invested in climate tech in 2020. And 2021 is looking to be even hotter for climate tech investing. There's new climate funds emerging from corporate strategic investors. Some Silicon veteran investors are joining the party. And existing clean tech VCs are unleashing some pent-up demand funds that they didn't deploy during the pandemic last year. So how can your climate tech startup grab a piece of this pie and secure the funding you need to scale your venture and achieve your mission? That's what today's session is all about. I'm Bettina Grab, your host for today. And before I introduce our amazing panelists, just a quick Zoom etiquette. Please mute yourself and you can feel free to have your video on or off. We invite you to have your video on. It's always lovely for the panelists to see who's in the room. And this is all about building a community. So we really encourage connections amongst yourselves as well. In that spirit, please use the chat freely, comment on what is being said, share your contact details, ask questions. We will be sharing the slides and the recording with everyone who has registered. So don't panic. And there'll also be a Q&A session for the audience at the end. So please pop your questions in the chat as they arise and we'll try and monitor them and field them to the panelists. We're super excited to have assembled a team of climate tech investing superstars. Judy Lee is Vice President at Energy Foundry. Judy drives new investment activity at Energy Foundry, an early stage clean tech venture fund in Chicago. She oversees Energy Foundry's 750 plus startups per year deal flow pipeline to diligence and finds the best opportunities. Additionally, she supports portfolio companies and holds advisory roles with top clean tech incubators and accelerators. And Judy is joining us from Chicago today. Vanessa Margolis is Portfolio Director at Virtulab. Vanessa has 15 years of experience serving a wide range of companies and individuals to establish and adopt sustainable manufacturing practices, programs, and products. Today, Vanessa is the Portfolio Director at Virtulab, where she leads the entrepreneur support team and works directly with dozens of entrepreneurs every year. And Vanessa is joining us from Portland, Oregon. Taj Ahmad Eldridge is General Partner and Co-Founder at Include Venture Partners. Taj is a 25-plus year investment professional whose career has included high-level executive roles in banking, asset management, alternative investments, and entrepreneurship. As General Partner of Include Venture Partners and as Senior Director of Investments at the Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator, better known as LACI, Taj has built a long-standing career with expertise in the fields of fintech, media, energy, transportation, and the circular economy. Taj is based in LA, but I know he was traveling a lot in recent days, so I assume you're still dialing in from LA today, Taj? Yeah.
I am.
Cool. And then our amazing moderator today is Melanie Adamson, Founder and Chief Strategist at Alder Agency & Co. Mel is a natural storyteller. If she isn't telling her client stories, then she's telling her own. Because Mel began her career as a journalist, she effectively uses investigative skills to pinpoint problems and discover communication gaps to be filled. Mel will tell you that she sits at the intersection between consumers and brand. For more than a decade, she's built marketing strategies for nearly every IOU, municipal, and public utility on the West Coast, and for clean tech companies and energy-focused agencies. And Mel is also based in Portland, Oregon. Woo. And I'm Bettina Grab. I'm a global B2B marketing leader, and my passion is helping climate tech companies scale through effective marketing and lead generation. I'm also Clean Tech Open's National Marketing Chair and a guest lecturer for clean tech and sustainability marketing at the Presidio Graduate School in San Francisco. And I'm based in the Bay Area. So we realized the panel today is a little West Coast heavy, but we realize all of you are joining from all over the US, or even beyond. And this is really about building a clean tech community. So please share your LinkedIn details and where you're dialing in from in the chat. For those of you who have just joined, please mute yourself, or you should be automatically muted. Feel free to share your video if you're comfortable doing so, and you'll be getting the slides and the recording after the webinar. And there'll also be an opportunity to ask questions at the end, so please pop them in the chat. Now I'll hand over to Mel, who will lead through the presentation and Q&A. And I will share my screen.
I'm so grateful to have everyone here today. We're really excited about sharing what we've learned from our panelists, and I think we have a really great content for you here today. But we're here to talk about marketing, and marketing is all about relationships. And at the core of what we do every day is really about finding that connection from brands to audiences in meaningful ways. And that's all about starting that conversation, maintaining it, and then growing it over time. So we're really lucky, and I feel really lucky to be working in clean tech because we're using our marketing superpowers for good. So today's discussion is about one of our target audiences, and that's investors. Because as a startup, early stage or growth stage company, fundraising for your business is an exercise in marketing. And because we're marketers, and some of us who are on this call, CEOs with your marketing hat on, you need to know your audience. So what's the most important thing for investors? What channels of communications do they like? What's the most important aspect of your business that they need to know about? And how do you stay in touch with them? So first off, we have Taj. He is going to present a couple of slides, and then we'll have some questions.
Great. Thank you, Mel. Thank you so much. So I'm Taj Eldridge, and I'm with Include Ventures. So Include Ventures is a new $250 million fund of funds and direct investment vehicle, where me and 3 other partners started this in 2020 to really kind of increase the people who are in venture, to include the voices who are typically not included, which includes people of color as GPs, as well as women investors in this space. One of the things that I've always talked about is I'm a former entrepreneur myself. I was lucky enough to have 2 exits along with many failures. But in that space, what I learned about is really how do you market to people like myself as an investors? Next slide. Even though my graduate degrees are in economics, my undergrad degree was in poetry and literature. The reason why that's important is because I understood from the very beginning how storytelling is a huge part of the financial model and what you need to do. The thing about it that's really interesting is that we are all attracted to stories, whether it's in religion, whether it's nature building, whether it's in family. Stories is a huge part of our lives. And we want to personalize it if you're talking to investors. One of the perfect examples I always talk about is when I talk to the person who created Planet Forward, Julia Collins. She's a really great investor, founder at Elemental and a couple other incubators. She talks about her family's history and the relationship with food. And so I think that that's really interesting to see. The next point about that is embracing conflict. Don't be afraid to really talk about the areas that are really controversial. Sometimes the losses. You hear me a lot of times when I talk about my experience as an entrepreneur, I openly talk about the times that we failed as well, in addition to the times we succeeded. You know, I look at wins and losses and W's and L's, not just as losses, but as learnings. And so there's a lot of learning opportunities in conflict and in failure. Defining a structure, really kind of creating this platform and making sure you get strictly to the point, that you're not meandering. What I talk about is learning periods in addition to commas. A lot of times people talk more in commas than in periods, and that's really one of the focuses there. And then 3 to 5 words that you want people to take away from the pitch. What I call that is the quotables. You know, those times where you're on a panel, you hear something great some person is saying, you tweet that. Those are the things that I love to see when you're talking to investors and you want them to come away with these little points and nuggets with it. I kind of call those your mini theses. And then lastly, practice. Practicing your story is really important, so that way it comes across natural as opposed to something that you're reading off a deck or anything else like that. You want to embody it. When I look at that is I think about your favorite story that you've read. favorite piece of literature, how you can quote that verbatim. That's what you want to do with your story and with your pitch as you're talking to investors. You want to make it as natural as a piece of literature that you're reading. Next slide, please. The other points, and I want to leave you with some action items here as well. So one of the things I always get when I talk to founders and they're pitching to investors and they're pitching to me, they need to understand the sectors that we're in. And I think in 20 years ago, when I first got into venture, it was a little bit difficult to kind of know who's investing in what. It was kind of pretty much a crapshoot. But I think now you have tools like signal.nfx.com that would allow you to look and see exactly what's the sweet spot of the investor that they're investing in, the sector, the amount, the location, things that they love. And so I think that's a really cool tool to utilize as a founder to ensure that you're having the right conversation with the right investor. Once you found that and you found the investor that you want to connect with, you want to add value. And you can even add value as a founder to investors. One of the things that people see a lot from me, if you follow me on LinkedIn, I share a number of articles that I've read myself that really impact the industry that I'm in and provide value. And so, there's some tools you can use to automate that. I automate a lot of the things that I post. And there's a tool called 4 Degrees that you can use that automate your CRM marketing and really kind of ensure you have touch points. The key to investors is that sometimes the no means not now and doesn't mean no. And you want to make sure that you're really kind of keeping those investors, in your purview. And so 4 Degrees is a really good tool to utilize to really kind of keep engaged with those investors. And then lastly, speak plainly. We've heard that many times, and I call it both the rule of 3 and 8 to 80. The rule of 3 is that similar to this point, 3, when you're looking at really kind of presenting points to investors or anybody else, the rule of 3 is really important because we can process a certain number of things at a time. So definitely think about things in batches of 3s. And the phrase 8 to 80, what I used to joke is that regardless of what you're building, whether it's a clean tech company, whether it's a marketing company, wherever you're building, you want to make sure that people as young as the age of 8, as old as the age of 80 can understand what you're building. So 8 to 80 is the way that you want to talk about what you're building so that way that everybody can grasp it. And if people want to go deeper into that and have the expertise, you can have that conversation as a side conversation as well. So these are the 3 points that I always talk about when you're combining the storytelling piece of it with the action piece of it, is knowing who you're talking to, adding value, and speaking plainly.
Thanks, Taj. Those are really great takeaways. One of the things I feel like, when I'm working with a startup or and trying to put like pitch decks together is even, researching your audience, of course, so really knowing who your investor is, and you backed up that point in terms of, getting to know who they are. How do you approach an investor that is not in the clean tech sector or in climate tech? They maybe, invest in a bunch of different things. How do you approach them if you have a very technical product?
Yeah, great question. And I think it's going to be very relevant because as you see now, for those of who've been in clean tech for the last couple of years, it looks like we've become the bells of the ball now, because now is on everyone's radar, right? You have firms like Andreessen Horowitz who famously said they would never invest in clean tech, and now they're investing in Black Power. And then you have, Sequoia and U.S. Ventures investing in this space. For me, and I'll be very frank, I didn't get into clean tech until about 8 years ago when I was the accelerator director at the University of California. And at that time, what I said, and I'm hoping that we're going to have it now, is that clean tech, like diversity, is going to be normalized, where you're not going to have to put it in its own bucket. Everything is going to be focused on sustainability. Everything is going to be focused on how do you really kind of make it to where the things that we're building are going to benefit the planet and the people. I think if you're a clean tech investor and you're having those conversations with non-clean tech investors, definitely still use the rule of 8 to 80, but also to explain very plainly how your technology is going to benefit. And I think the fear that non-climate tech investors have is that, right, this is great for the environment, but how I'm going to make my money back, or how this is going to add to the value of my investment. And so you want to have those conversations early on. And really kind of determine that and really have those conversations with it. Lastly, I would say that another thing that I think that's been normalized is the term impact investing. historically, we've placed impact investing separate from traditional investing. And we've always often talked about impact investing as conciliatory alpha. I think personally, and I've heard this phrase used before, is that every investment that we make has an impact. The impact can be positive or negative. And so I think now what we're seeing is, again, is clean tech investors or clean tech founders, they're coming up with ways to really talk about the technology that they're building, how they're going to have direct impact, both economically and physically as well. I often say that the clean tech and climate tech investing has many different impacts, but the impacts are threefold: environmental impact, economic impact with job creation, and social justice impact, really doing the right things with certain communities.
Yeah, those are super important. I really like what you said about, making things, making clean tech mainstream, right? Mm-hmm. And investors wanting to partake in that. And I think that's really great. That's at least Alder's mission. So we want to make sure that everyone's adopting this technology. So when it comes to different types of investors, there's companies that are really capital intensive, and then there's software companies. They're not targeting the same type of investors. Yeah. Talk to me about, what's the approach for trying to find those types of investors, those different types of investors?
Yeah, good question. Definitely. What you're building, whether it's a software company or hardware company, definitely going to have different type of investors that look at both. I think hardware investors, I'm a hardware investor myself and a software investor, so we take a hybrid approach. But I think tools like I mentioned, the signalf.fx.com is a really great tool to determine, who you're looking at. And I think when you're having conversations with hardware investors versus software investors, there are different types of valid points that we tend to look at. We want to see. But at the end of the day, what you have to do as a founder to market to investors, whether or not they're investing in hardware or software, is what I would do when I was a founder is I would find out what are the things is that what are their goals, right? A lot of times the goals could be, of course, return to the LPs, but the goals can be much, much more. And so what you want to find out is what their goals are. And then in addition to that, what I would always say, and the role that I took as a founder was that, and this may be controversial, but I did, when I was a founder, I said that the investors needed me as much as I needed them. Without me, they couldn't have a job of investing. And so I would make that interview them as they were interviewing me, and I would ask them questions about their model, their portfolio, how they look at what they're adding value. Because I think what's happening now is that investors are realizing, and you're seeing this with platform services at firms and accelerators. The call I was just on previously before this was a venture studio, which is coming into the climate space as well, a lot of venture studios. So there's a lot of competition now for capital to come to founders and with great ideas. And so I think it's a really great time for founders themselves to really kind of think hard and long about the type of capital that they want to pursue. I think with venture studios, venture debt, grant opportunities that are out there, many different things, it is the best time to be a founder. And it's the best time to really kind of determine the type of investor partner that you want to have. At the end of the day, your investor is like a marriage. And so you want to make sure that there's alignment that's there. Me, myself, when I talk to founders or I talk to fund managers, I'll say that I'm providing more than just capital. I'm providing the 4 C's. And the 4 C's are access to capital, access to customers, access to connections, and access to culture. All 3 of those things really impact my investment in you. And so those are the things that you want to look for as you're looking at investors to market to and investors to work with.
That's super informative. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I know, so we're going to talk to Vanessa next. And I know that she's definitely said a couple of times that, meeting investors is like a marriage, finding that right investor. So Vanessa, I'll let you take it away.
Hi, thank you, and welcome everyone. My name is Vanessa Margolis. I'm at Virtue Lab. Virtue Lab is a nonprofit that we're a nonprofit fighting climate change by offering funding and holistic support to early stage clean tech startups. So when I'm speaking today, I wear 2 hats in Virtue Lab. I head up the Entrepreneur Support Services, which includes our accelerator and helping access federal grants and, working on pitch coaching, to help companies actually, raise capital. And I'm also on the, I'm part of a review team on the other side of the house, which is our Climate Impact Fund, where we're watching companies come and pitch. So in my weekly life, I'm sort of in both camps of helping companies perfect their pitch and also evaluating the pitches that are coming to us. Next slide, please. So we work with very early stage companies. And I think this panel is really interesting because Taj and Judy and I know each other, but we touch companies sort of at different spots sometimes. And so I'm going to talk about a very typical profile of a company that is either applying for our fund or we're working with on with our support programs. And so I think this profile probably applies to 50 to 60% of the companies that we work with. So we work in the pre-seed, seed stage. And as you know, there's always sort of different definitions in terms of amounts and what does this mean, but I think everyone can agree that this is the very, very, very early stage, the early part of fundraising. And so a lot of the companies that we're working with are hardware and it's deep science. So it's really common for us to have a PhD, maybe even more than a PhD on the founding team. Most likely they have no revenue because they have no customers yet. And they probably have no customers yet because they're still developing and proving out the technology. So this is a little bit of an interesting space to be in. And if they're marketing around fundraising at this point, there's two avenues they're going. The private capital, which very common are individual angels or angel groups, or early pre-seed, seed funds like the Virtue Lab Climate Impact Fund. I'm also listing another organization called IdeaShip because we co-invest with them quite a bit and they have a really interesting model. So I always like to mention names so people know there are funds out there that are in that stage. And then we also work with them on accessing federal grants. So what the early stage marketing items that I'm going to talk more about on the next slide, it's definitely the building blocks for both of these different avenues when they're applying for, when they're trying to raise capital. Next slide, please. So, you know, when I'm talking to a company and we're helping them with their pitch deck, we always talk about the goal to inspire confidence and make the audience care. And I'm going to talk about some things that Taj has already mentioned, but they're really, really important. So I'm going to highlight them even more. At the beginning, you know, as a founder or as a, you know, someone working on a startup, you're living, eating, and breathing something. Like it's what you have to do. And it's so difficult to step outside of that and put yourself in the shoes of someone who is not eating and breathing and living the problem in the way that you are. And in fact, maybe looking at a tremendous amount of technologies on any given week. And so we spend a tremendous amount of time working with companies to develop their 1 minute of describing the problem and describing the solution in a way that an 8th grader can understand. You know, Taj talked about 8 to 80. We just sort of settled on 8th grade, but I think 8 to 80 is probably a great term as well. And I really can't stress this enough. And, you know, if you don't have an 8th grader in your life, you know, practice on a friend or practice on a friend's friend. It's a very difficult thing to do. Like, it sounds so simple, and it's honestly one of the hardest things to do. The worst case outcome is after you do a pitch is the person on the other end of the table does not understand your problem or your solution. And I've been kind of amazed of the pitches I've sat through where at the end, I don't understand. And, you know, I've gone through enough of that I don't have a problem, you know, raising my hand and saying, I actually don't understand, you know, can we drill down a little bit more? I think I'm actually in the minority. And I think a lot of people, if they don't understand, they sort of disregard it. It's viewed as not, well, I don't understand it, so it's not important, or Maybe they're embarrassed to ask a question. They don't want to come across as looking stupid. There's a lot that goes into it, but this is one of the hardest things to do. And I really always encourage people to practice, 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 and engage others to practice on. The other way, because again, I'm working with companies that have no revenue, so they have no customers most likely, and they don't, the technology may not be proven out, is you need to, again, going back to that goal of inspiring confidence and making the audience care, you're going to have to explain the competition to them. You need to convey to them that this isn't just a science project, that you understand that there's a bigger picture at play, and you care about this technology, but there's a much larger landscape and you have your eye on that. So talking about the competitive landscape, talking about the potential customers, where do you fit there? And also talking about the team. We all know that the team, when we're talking to you today, may look very different in a year, 2 years, or 5 years. But those are the key items that we really try to impart on the companies that we work with when they are fundraising to investors.
Thanks, Vanessa. That's super helpful. And we'll probably hear this a million times today, to be, thoughtful about your storytelling and describing it in a way that anyone can understand it. Starting out in tech, that was definitely a problem back then. I say one of the first things people can do is just take acronyms out of their story. That's like one easy one just to take out. But I wanted to talk to you about what are some of those key characteristics that you're looking for, because they are such early stage. So you're really looking at the team. And I'm curious to know, what are those things that you're looking for in a team, and also the leaders of the team, if not the CEO, when you're looking to decide whether or not to invest in them?
Yeah, I'm not the fund manager there, so I get to put in input, but I'm not the ultimate decider. So I'll let you know from Vanessa's perspective what I'm looking for. It really gets back to what's on the slide here. There's this, that I've talked about on the page, and we touched on this briefly in the pre, but there's also some sort of nonverbal communication, that I'm sort of watching as well. I want to be inspired by them. I want to feel confident in them. Most likely I'm being educated. I see a tremendous amount of technologies. And so I'm learning a lot of times in those pitches. I'm learning and I'm writing a lot of notes. And I know that, and I'm totally fine with that. There are some investors I know who really, it's important for someone to come in and to own the room and to kind of exude confidence. I don't care if someone's nervous. It's a super high pressure situation. I go into any situation knowing that and really trying to have as much compassion as possible, because there is so much on the line for the person on the other side of the table. So I'm not worried about confidence or nervousness, but I really just want to walk away feeling like this person knows their stuff, and they can. And I will also say that, that problem and solution in a way that's very simple. I think one of the hardest things in the world is to take something that's incredibly complicated and bring it down and distill it to something that, an eighth grader can understand. I saw Ken made the comment that most eighth graders are smarter than he is. And that's probably, I feel like I could probably agree with that statement. They're probably smarter than I am. But, I want to see that they can kind of transcend, that they can pull out and they can go big picture, and then they can go deep. To me, that's always really helpful when I can see that.
That's really great. Thank you so much. So next we're going to move on to Judy, who from Energy Foundry, who's going to talk to us about her tips and tricks for marketing to investors.
Great, thank you. So I guess just to wrap up, just a little bit about Energy Foundry. We are a clean tech venture fund based in Chicago, And we invest in early stage companies, clean tech companies, can have hardware, software, material science technologies, where we really like deep tech startups and invest in many of them. And typically we're like seed investors. So if you kind of think about where Vanessa, Taj, and I kind of are in the spectrum, there's some overlap, mutual overlap, but usually we're in like the seed stage. And my role at Energy Foundry is more on the new deal side. That's my primary focus. So I do assist in like portfolio support and helping out companies we've already invested. And there's often like marketing and sales conversations that come up then as well. But then I do see lots and lots of company pitches and interact with entrepreneurs in that like early pitching and due diligence phase. So a lot of my thoughts here are from that experience. Prior to Energy Foundry, I worked at a local energy efficiency startup. So at the startup, there was a lot of sales and marketing that we had to figure out kind of on the fly. And so I think that also helps inform like the way I think about marketing. Cool. And so specifically on like investing and talking with investors, when I look at the fundraising cycle, there's the active fundraising period and then there's the inactive fundraising period. And the way I define that is like active fundraising is when you are active, like there's a round open, you have a pitch deck, you've practiced, you're like trying to go through the pitching, talk to as many investors as possible, do all of the things that Vanessa and Taj have been talking about with simplifying your message, knowing your story, and try to like get a round closed. Inactive fundraising is more kind of in between rounds when you still have a bunch of cash runway left and you're working on growing the business. Maybe you recently closed a round, maybe you're 6 months, 12 months away from opening up a new round. But there are some things that you can do in that inactive period that help with your active fundraising time. And so for active fundraising, I just have a list of things here, but what generally works really, really well for me in an active fundraising situation, and I observe other venture capital investors too, is when the entrepreneur can like create a sense of urgency or like FOMO, fear of missing out. It's very similar to like sales strategy and when you're selling a product to a customer, trying to make them move. But if you can communicate in as honest and genuine as a way as you can that the round is moving with or without you, like that's how you get investors to try to make a decision and at least give you feedback if they're in or out, because you don't want to be wasting time on investors that can't make up their mind or don't have the bandwidth. And so if you communicate some sort of sense of urgency, you might be able to pull out insights to whether or not they'll be able to move on this round. There is no such thing as following up too many times. I think the way to think about this is investors are often talking with many, many companies at the same time, trying to juggle like which ones are moving forward, which ones are not, internal conversations around which ones, and limited bandwidth of getting the entire team on the same page. And so sometimes it's unfortunate if like your company is the one that just like doesn't make it into those conversations in a quick manner. And so following up often is important, because like the people who follow up the most, I end up wanting to. So I end up paying attention more to like those who follow up often, because I feel like the pressure of like, oh, I need to get back to them, unless you get like a hard pass or a no. And then also you're gonna want to make sure you're showing investors that you know how to drive forward the process. Fundraising is a complex process. You have to juggle multiple investors, different levels of interest, who are all asking you different questions. And so your ability to like shepherd everybody along in the process is also something that we're judging you on, because that gives us more confidence of your ability to get other things done in your business. And so the more that you can, keep an open line of communication and like give us confidence that you're able to push this forward is important. Sell the vision, but be trustworthy, just good sales presence. Pitch in as many events as you can that are targeting the investors you want to reach. And this is funny. Sometimes I get introductions to companies that I've already met with, or like someone else in our team has met with, and we had like a significant deep conversation in the team about them, and it just doesn't make you look good. So like try not to do that if you know you've already invested some time with an investor or that group before, unless it was like, in passing and very brief and you didn't actually get a chance to connect. So really quickly on inactive fundraising, I get a ton of emails, so I hope this doesn't result in a bunch of email overload for everybody, but like it is really nice to get some update emails from companies that I'm trying to follow, and maybe it wasn't the right time when they first reached out to me, but depending on the kinds of updates in those emails, it might pique my interest. And so having newsletters or emails that generally have updates and asks of the people who are trying to follow your company is helpful, but no more than quarterly, because you want to show like progress between each newsletter and not feel like you're inundating your viewers. Network, establish relationships whenever you can to prepare. And it's not too early to start talking with investors, because you never know if they've got their hands full with other opportunities and they need to, put other interesting new opportunities on the back burner while they wrap up their current opportunities. And so without knowing where they are in their kind of committed timeline, it's good to start the conversation early. And I put don't use social media posts to build early stage investor interest, because a lot of early stage investors I know aren't really active on social media. So if that's somewhere you're investing time into for the purpose of attracting investors, it might not be as effective. Next slide. So lastly, so individual brand versus company brand. My preference is that when I think about brand, it is more about the individual brand actually at the early stage, because usually your company is still early and small and you might be pre-revenue or like very, very early revenue or pilots. And so like the company brand still has a lot of space and room to grow. And so the way I think about it is for investors, you really have to think about your individual and your founders like individual brands, because we're investing with the confidence in your vision, your technology, and the people who can build like a valuable company around that. Don't be like Elon Musk, because if you think about his like stardom in social media and what it does, it might be really interesting and exciting for like public, stock, shareholders and investors, which is a metric for them, kind of their stock and how good it's doing, how well it's doing. But for a private company at the seed stage, you don't want to look like Elon Musk. It just makes you look like you are spending time in the wrong places. And then I already talked about social media and practice. I think we've talked about that with Vanessa and Taj a bunch. And building relationships, because it is a long-term relationship. I agree with what Vanessa and Taj said on those points. And then for company brand, I would focus on the brand towards the customer, because ultimately the customer might not know you. They see your advertising, your marketing efforts, and decide they're interested in your product. So really tailor your brand towards the customer. And as investors, we're looking for that. Like we want to see that whatever logo, whatever brand you have is something that's attractive to your customers. And then there is some PR that you can think about at the early stage that does attract both investors, partners, customers. And so whenever you have an opportunity to make a big announcement at some trade show, at whatever event, like you should try to pursue those opportunities, because I have seen that help generate interest from kind of later stage investors into a company. Yeah, and then this last point of like brand, culture, and wellness being important for the team and talent that you want to recruit. But that only can be built once you have kind of a bigger team, right? So that's something to keep in mind for the future if you're an early stage company.
Thank you, Judy. This was so informative. I really love your comment about don't be Elon Musk, only because I've seen that a couple of times from different companies or CEOs that I've met, which is awesome. I mean, it's great to be aspirational, but his strategy is very disruptive, or can be. But I love what you said about brand, and I think there's a lot of times CEOs or founders aren't sure when to bring in marketing people to help with the brand. Do you have any suggestions around like what's the right timing, or when should they start reaching out to professionals?
Professional, like when should they start reaching out?
Professional marketers, yeah.
I think that I have seen companies go through rebrands, right? So I've seen companies, when we invest at the seed stage, they have something, and then they decide they want to change their name and logo just based on whatever's come up in the market. And so, obviously, if you're doing a rebrand, definitely work with a professional. And I think once you start getting serious about marketing to customers, I think it really helps to at least have someone, whether it's someone who can help you, who's a professional, or working, contracting a professional to like help you create materials that really do get to the core of like what you're trying to sell and communicate the message and are effective as like sales and marketing material. That can be really important. But at the same time, we talk with a lot of our companies about when do you invest money into like scaling sales. And in the early days, you kind of have to try a lot of different things before you figure out what your like repeatable, scalable sales marketing strategies are. And so I think as long as you can, if you need assistance to think of what those strategies could be to try, that's one place to engage. And then once you have tried a few things and you're deciding what works and what you're going to invest more in to fuel your growth, I think that's when you really want to professionalize things and invest in that once you know.
That's great. Okay. Thank you so much. I think we are going to move to the next section of our webinar, which is audience Q&A. So now it's your turn. Everyone, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat and then direct them to any one of our panelists. What questions do we have here?
All right, sorry, I'll probably just jump in because I was handling the tech and monitoring the questions. So obviously Judy was up last, so there were a lot of questions top of mind. So one was from Laureen. Judy, can you please describe how to implement the sense of FOMO in the active bucket while also starting those early conversations as you suggest in the inactive bucket?
Yeah, I think the way to do that is to just be transparent in the inactive phase. It's like, look, we have all of this runway, like it's low pressure. I actually find those kinds of conversations are like lower pressure conversations in which it might be easier to like build more of a personal relationship with whoever you're talking to, because it's like the pressure is off. It's like no one's in a rush to like make anything happen. And so that can be refreshing. And then in the stepping up the FOMO when you're actively fundraising, I think it is, when you're following up with the investor, like kind of like putting in a few words of like, well, we've got like a bunch of these other investors in the data room, or like I've like had some other great conversations with other investors and like there's a lot of interest and I'm trying to like figure out like allocation in the round amongst all of the interested parties. You don't have to, definitely don't lie about what's going on, but you also don't have to be like super specific, leave room for imagination.
Yeah, Bettina, if I may, I want to add to that, to what Judy said. One of the things, to her last point about being truthful and honest, when you mentioned that, like Judy and Vanessa, we know each other. And a lot of times investors will talk and we'll ask each other. When you see somebody else that said in the other room, you'll call them and say, hey, are you looking at this company? You know, so I've seen situations where founders were a little bit more, you know, free dealing with their conversations that they mention with other investors. So just keep that in mind too when you're doing that, to ensure that you're being authentic when you're talking about what you're doing with other investors, because, you know, like I said before, it's a very small community, believe it or not.
Oh gosh, there are so many questions coming in. Thank you so much. I'm going to go through the list. So there's an interesting one from Tony, and it was directed at Judy, but I think you probably all have an opinion on that one. Judy, you said, don't be like Elon Musk, but who should people be like instead? Who should they emulate? Who's doing a great job?
I mean, it's so hard to compare. I mean, Taj, Vanessa, if you guys have any ideas, please jump in. But I can't think of like an individual off the top of my head right now, because the famous people that we think about are like leaders of big public companies, and they have a different audience. So I don't think it's that can be a vision and a goal to achieve in the future, but I'm not sure if any of those profiles are exactly what you want to base yourself off of for this current period.
I think it's important to be yourself and figure out what you are as a leader and what you're like. And, you know, the goal when you're doing investment is to get to know you, right? And as, you know, as Taj said, like, be honest, because, you know, we want to find out what's going on, and authenticity is important. And we want to know that's there. And I think, you know, there's a difference between coaching and like coming in and, you know, kind of figuring out what your weak spots are and like, you know, trying to be the best you can be. But I definitely, you know, you are where you are and you have gifts that you're bringing, and, you know, figure out what your strengths are and, you know, what you could maybe work on, but really focus on being you. I mean, you've got a lot you're going to have to be dealing with when you're pitching, and trying to be someone you're not is really hard. And you want to focus on everything else in the pitch. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, and I think for me, I definitely agree with don't be like Elon Musk. I think you know, when I look at founders, I compare the founder ecosystem to music. I'm a huge music fan. Anybody who's ever followed me know I do a lot of music quotes. My children are into music as well. But the way I look at it is that, you know, artists, musicians, they're like founders. You're creating a product or service that you're providing for someone else to purchase. Those artists or the musicians, they're funded by record labels, similar to record labels being like venture funds who are funding the founders. And lastly, how do you discover those founders? Are through Spotify, ESPs, radio stations. Those are like accelerators and incubators who really amplify the voices of the founders or the artists. That being said, similar to there are always new artists are out there. There are always going to be new founders out there. So for me, I want the founder to be themselves, like Vanessa said. And instead of looking for the next Elon Musk, I'm looking for the next Zora, or the next Neil, or the next Phil, or the next Joe. Because I think that's the whole benefit of it. And it goes back to what I think Julie mentioned about marketing yourself or branding yourself first before you do the company. Because when you're doing early investors in pre-seed and seed, you're really placing your bet on the founder and on the founding team. So I want to make sure that you have that experience in that space, and you're really building a pace of it. You know, I think that, you know, I've seen some founders who build a really great, you know, profile of being a founder who cares about building other builders, as opposed to people who just want to be maintenance or just maintain the status quo. And I think that's a really great trait to have, as well as a person who builds and constantly builds.
Yeah, and that kind of raises an interesting point too when we're talking about founders. I mean, there's usually more than one. And how does that dynamic work? Are you suggesting two people come into the pitch? Is it just the CEO who tends to be more visionary, or how many people do you bring in?
You know, that's a funny thing. That was a bit of a controversy on a conversation that we had with other investors. Some investors, and I tell you, it will be different from different people. Me personally, you know, if there is a founding team, I don't need the whole founding team to pitch to me. I want one person to come, because my thinking is those other people should be doing something else to build a business up. There are some investors who want the whole team to be there to pitch. They want to see the whole team. They want to kind of look everything in one fell swoop. Whereas I may take multiple meetings because I want to kind of hear it. And to be honest, what I'm doing is seeing if there's consistency between the team members. If I meet with you separately and it's the same thing that I'm hearing from one person to the next, that gives me a confidence that the team culture, the team dynamic is key. But I think just what I've been hearing has been different for different folks, and I'd be love to hear what Judy and Vanessa has to say about it.
Yeah, I like having more people there, actually. So, and you know, based on what Taj said, there's a few things that I'm looking for. Again, getting back to the stuff that's happening that's not directly in the pitch. I'm watching to see how they're interacting with each other, which I think is important. You know, if we're going to talk about what not to do, you know, be respectful to your colleagues. Like if we're watching a pitch when, you know, someone's really dominating and clearly, you know, shutting other people down, like we're paying attention to that. We're like, oh, you know, and so, you know, and I know this is like hugely controversial and people may have different opinions on this, but we had a pitch recently and the founder there were, I think, 3 members of the team and I don't think I think the team was relatively small, and they also had their intern in the background. And when we got to a Q&A section, the founder let the intern answer. And I mean, the intern was very excited, and the founder ultimately had to be like, okay, thanks, we're good, you know. But I think from our end, it was really endearing to many of us. Like he really wanted, you know, it was an internship, it was an opportunity. And so this is really controversial, but, you know, I think from that landed really well with a lot of people on our side of the table when that happened.
I have another question here from the audience. How best should a startup communicate well when investors won't see your business as an asset heavy, but prefer an asset light startup?
I can take this one first. Okay, but just to revisit the previous question, I'm kind of in Taj's camp. Prefer at most 2 people, definitely the CEO and maybe a CTO or whoever else is relevant for the call. So yeah, but I can talk about that more later if there's questions. For asset heavy versus asset light, I mean, I would almost flip that, the inspiration behind that question. There's like 2 ways. So like one is, are you even targeting the right investors? There are some investors who are okay with more asset heavy business models. And so if that's what you are pursuing, go find like the right investors who will have evidence of being open to invest in those kinds of companies and models. If your model is still too asset heavy for those investors, or they're not biting, there might be something you can change about your business model that will be more palatable to investors, and that can be a market signal to you. So kind of think about it in those 2 ways.
And I remember in our pre-meeting, we had talked about, you know, about the idea of actually not even having a pitch deck there. Do you guys have thoughts or opinions on whether or not to even bring a pitch deck, and when do you bring a pitch deck? And so tell me what you think.
Yeah, well, let me kind of tackle that in both ways, both to answer the question you just asked previously, Mel, about asset versus light. I think it goes back to the whole idea of Lauren and I was having a conversation in the chat about just interacting, and what I said was, you know, speak to what people love, and we often talk about you know, in finding investors is like a marriage, and we really have to look into that. What that means is that you have to speak the love language of your investor. You know, if your investor is not into the space of asset heavy, you're not speaking their love language, and so you have to make sure that you're actually talking to investors in the space. And if not, you have to speak to what they are looking for. And how do you find investors and what they're looking for? You look to their past investments. You look at what they've talked about on social media, on interviews, or panels, and everything else like that. So you really kind of use a lot of that deductive reasoning for it. To the other question that you asked, Mel, and I'm trying to remember. Could you repeat that again?
Oh, it was about whether or not to even use a pitch deck. Like, I mean, do you just start having, you know, just one-on-one conversations?
Yeah.
You know, without one, or?
Yeah, when I was a founder, I did two things. I'm gonna talk about from a founder standpoint and then from an investor standpoint. When I was a founder, I had an executive summary, a one-pager, and I had a pitch deck. But I had both ready at any time that we were talking. I often was once we got on the call, I would lead with the exec summary, send it out if we're not having a conversation, and then if we're at the meeting, then have a pitch deck ready to pitch. But I kind of gave it where they had those options and they knew it. As an investor now, time is very, very targeted and limited. And sometimes I kind of like to have a lot of information up front before we have those conversations. And I again think an exec summary would be beneficial for me before we even have those conversations to make me determine whether or not I'm going to really dig into the conversation. But I think, it just depends on that investor and how you lead. There's been some calls where I've had with founders where I say, let's just have a conversation. I want to talk it through. And I didn't really have them pitch. But they pitched me without a pitch deck, by talking through their innovation and really kind of showing me what the world looks like post with their innovation. And I've had situations where it's just been a traditional pitch. Going back to what we talked about, I'm a lover of storytelling. I feel like, I'll be honest, and this is another controversy. I feel like Shark Tank has hurt the entrepreneurship industry, where we think that everything has to be Shark Tankish and that we have to treat each other Shark Tankish. And I don't believe in that. What I believe in, though, is that show me your innovation that you're making. Show me how the world is going to look after your innovation. And that's going to determine whether or not I'm going to invest in that. And you can talk that through with me and have those conversations. But I definitely think just having both the tools that you need, both the exec summary and the deck, are going to be beneficial. Just have them always at the ready when you get ready to talk to investors.
I 100% agree with Taj. And I would also just add one other thing on that, especially if it's, over Zoom or even if it's in person, be prepared for there to be an AB issue. So, if that's like handouts or just notes in front of you or whatnot. So I would say the inverse of that, but yes, just be prepared.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just like, I saw a question here on like, do we need to redo our whole pitch deck to like be able to be comprehended without someone walking through it? And so I think actually just work on a good executive summary. I like what Taj said there. I agree with Taj and Vanessa on those points. And so your pitch deck, like people might ask, like, could you send me your pitch deck? But if your pitch deck is like right now tailored for narration to fill in the gaps and details, then just work on an executive summary and send that to them along with your pitch deck. It's more conducive for like reading through and understanding.
That's great. So we have another question from the audience. Ryan Barr was asking what to put inside of the investor newsletter while inactive, and how much personalization should you include in the newsletter?
None. I mean, so don't personalize it. Make it easy for you to send to people in your on your list, and have opportunities to like. Don't assume that, so investors keep confidentiality treat confidentiality very seriously. So like you could say like confidential like on your newsletter if you wanted to, but if you want to be safe, just don't include anything confidential in there. But do know that investors in general like are very sensitive about that. But it's business updates, customer updates, and I think focus it on the key metrics for why investors should be interested. So like your key growth metrics, like the milestones, keep in mind the milestones you're trying to achieve between rounds. And that's kind of what you should try to report on. And whatever your business is, you might have different kinds of sections, but generally like, customer development or business development activity, whether it's tech R&D development, any breakthroughs there, if that's still going on for your company. I think team is fine too, but it's almost like investors would rather get to know team members at the point of fundraising. So I would say you wouldn't have to like focus too hard on that for the update periods.
I agree with everything Judy said, and I just sort of want to highlight that if you have sort of like your key metrics, then your newsletter can be quick. And this has two benefits. One is it won't be really daunting for you to put it together. I have a lot of challenges sometimes with companies of like somehow putting a newsletter together becomes very emotional, like it has to be perfect, and it becomes very loaded. And just a very simple update goes a really long way. It doesn't have to be Picasso. And so when you keep it simple, it'll higher chance of it being read and understood, and it won't be as daunting to do it.
No, totally agree with both what Vanessa and Judy said. I actually put a tool that some of our founders use in the chat called Founder Suite that makes your newsletter for you, that automates it. I'm a huge fan of automation. I'll give you all the secret here. A lot of the articles that are posted on LinkedIn from me are really from AI. I read them all, but once I finish reading them, it posts for me. So a lot of those posts are automated. I'm a firm believer in using the tools of technology to really kind of advance what you're doing personally. And I think even if I was a founder again, I would do the same thing with newsletters. And I totally agree, keeping it short and simple. I see a lot of founders labor over their newsletters, and I'm like, that's the least the thing you have to do. I'm going to spend about a few minutes reading it, but what I'm going to look for is the highlights, what's changed. And for me, when you're making newsletters, what the key about it is that show growth. And growth can be more than just investments that you're doing or investors that are on timeline. It can be grants that you've secured. I've seen somebody here I think somebody here was from SBIR. I love seeing when I see founders really kind of take advantage of non-dilutive capital. I love when I see founders take advantage of what's happening in the market. And more importantly, I love when founders show what's happening publicly, whether it's political policy, whether it's things in the economic arena, are impacting their company either positively or negatively. I also for me, I always say I like to smell the roses, but I also like to feel the dirt. So not only talk about the positive things, but talk about the things that are concerning, because what I want to see is how you overcome those concerns that are coming for your company.
That's really great. We have another question from the audience. When to use social media? So what is part of getting sales versus investors?
Does anybody
You
feel
said
compelled?
social media? I'm sorry, can you repeat that, Mel?
Oh, sure. When to use social media? What part of social media is getting sales, and then what, I think one of the slides said no social media to attract investors. I think Judy, that was you that said that, but Taj, Vanessa, do you guys agree with that? So when to use social media for you guys?
Yeah, I think it's kind of, I've been pitched via Twitter. I'm still trying to figure that out. But I think that, I tend to agree. I think that for me, social media is about personal branding. It's about like when I'm posting on social media myself, what I'm trying to show is that these are the things I care about: music and entrepreneurship. So everything that I'll post will be kind of on those lanes. And what I'm trying to, in economics, we call it signifiers. What do you want to signify? What is your media signifying? I think, to Judy's point, and I tend to agree about pitching, to investors in their social media. It used to be where you would want a referral to come into it, I think right now what's happening too is investors are going to places like Virtue Lab and Lacey and just kind of looking at some of the founders that are in those ecosystems and those areas. And I think now that the only benefit of COVID, with this horrible disease, has been things like this, where I'm literally going from 4 panels today speaking, so have an opportunity to meet some great founders. And I think this is the best time to really kind of engage and do it and really ask some great questions and really come into this space. I mean, I see a lot of us have shared on LinkedIn on the chat, and it's a really great way to start the engagement. But I think I've seen full-on pitches where people have just had these threads of pitches on social media. Don't do that. It doesn't go too well. It only works for Elon Musk.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Taj said and Judy as well. So from a social media perspective, I'm not on Twitter anymore. It was not a happy place, so I got off of Twitter. But LinkedIn, I tend to use LinkedIn more. If you're trying to send me a pitch deck over LinkedIn, I'm overwhelmed. I think LinkedIn is, I would, in terms of making connections, like I've had people reach out to me over LinkedIn and say, I'm reaching out to you and here's why. And that goes a long way for me to say, like, oh, they've researched me, they've researched Virtue Lab, like there's actually a reason why they're trying to connect with me, as opposed to, I feel like sometimes people reach out on LinkedIn and it just feels like they're just doing the whatever, it's either like a request with no context or they're telling me something that's not really relevant to me. So I'm wondering why they're reaching out, except the fact that we're an investor. And so I just would say that, if you are going to use social media, customize it, like let the person on the other end know I'm reaching out to you for this, and keep it short and keep it simple.
Okay.
Can I address this question alongside a question I saw about crowdfunding? I think social media can be very powerful if your product, your service is very public facing. So if your customer is going to be the general public, usually there's segments within the general public, but like people, not like a specific business or industrial customer. So if you're targeting people, whether it is for crowdfunding or for your product sales, then social media is useful. But I don't think social media has a role to play for attracting early stage investors. At least not for me. I do get folks reaching out on LinkedIn, and my take on that is if it looks completely irrelevant, kind of like what Vanessa said, if it's like, you don't even know that we focus on energy and clean tech, I'm just gonna ignore it. And if it appears kind of relevant, then I'll probably just direct them towards my email inbox. So I will occasionally look through what's in my LinkedIn inbox. But on the crowdfunding front, I have seen, we have been attracted to companies time to time that have had success crowdfunding for like their initial MVP or initial launch of like first versions of their product. And to us, that's a signal. If they could be so successful in crowdfunding, it's a signal to us that they have kind of that like digital marketing and sales prowess in the digital arena, especially if it's a product that's targeting consumers, because then you build kind of a following if you've had like a really successful crowdfunding campaign. And so it totally depends on the product. I wouldn't recommend crowdfunding for a product that is like targeting B2B, it's for an industrial customer.
Yeah.
So we have one more question from the audience, and then we're going to move on to do's and don'ts. This is from Tanya Barham from CEL. She's founder. She wants to know, how do you see or read through investors' marketing to understand who is the best fit? So putting on your founder hat.
I would say look at the portfolio. I think there's what they say and there's what they do, which is true for anyone, right? And so, actions speak louder than words, whatever. I mean, ideally, a company who has a connection to them, or, you're looking through it. But I think that's really a great way to go. And if you know someone at the companies, or you know someone who knows someone, see if you can use your LinkedIn through that one. That would be one of the first things I would offer up.
Yeah, same here. I mean, I'm a fund of funds, so I invest in venture funds, and as a track record. I mean, that's how we look at it. We look at what they say their thesis is, and then what they invest in. What they invest in speaks a lot more than what they say their thesis is. And so, I would tend to, just like Vanessa said, look towards that as a way to determine how the companies are. I mentioned in the chat, another tools I used to use when I was a founder, even now as a fund of funds, is I look at the whole digital life of a person, which is really interesting, and it's kind of stalky, but it's okay to do it. But I look at, articles that they've written, articles that they've talked about, things that they've been on. And there are tools out there, and I mentioned 4 Degrees is one of the tools that I personally use. And so what happens is, when I get an email in, when I see an email out, on the side of my profile with that tool, it'll list every social media post, it'll list every article either written by that person or even that person wrote. And you could do the same thing, and I mentioned with Google Alerts and IFTTT, but that's just the way that I kind of attain the area of the fund, and how they're looking at and what they're marketing to and what they're meaning of is based upon what they invest in, what they talk about, who they talk about, what they tweet about, and what they post about.
All right. Any other thoughts on that one? Okay, well, let's move on. And I really love how diverse, well, you guys come from, your companies each are different. You're targeting different types of companies, and all within climate tech. So I love the diversity on this panel, but also know that, every investor is different, right? And so there's going to be there's a scale of things that work and don't work. It really just depends on the person, right? But this is sort of a snapshot of what works for you guys. So I wanted to do this section called Do's and Don'ts. We tend to do one of these on our webinars. They're kind of fun, but I'll say something and you tell me a do or a don't. And some of these we've already covered, but let's just go through it. So bringing in one or more person on a pitch call, do or don't? Okay. Research on the investor. What's the reason they connected? Showing research that, yeah. Awesome.
Okay, we're recording, sorry to interrupt, panelists, we're recording this, so we do need your voice for the video to latch onto you and show you. So please sign us great, yes, but also just say what you're thinking. Thank you.
100%, yes.
Okay. PowerPoint or not?
Your choice.
Be prepared.
Prepared.
Yeah. Yeah. Get emotional.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Passion is key.
So it's so funny, Taj, because in the pre-call, we had this old debate. I brought this up. The quote so at Virtue Lab, we have to have a quote under each of us. And I actually took a quote from Brad Feld. And for those of you who don't know Brad Feld, he's one of the co-founders of Techstars. He's anyway, I saw him speak at a conference, and he said, I'm looking for obsession, not passion. And I really loved that. And I was like, yeah, I'm looking for obsession, not passion. He said, you can get seduced by passion. And so I think it's important to show that you care. Like, I want to know that you care. But I also really want to know, like, you're obsessed, like it's more than emotional.
Yeah, I can see that. I think the reason why I like passion, if we keep talking using the marriage analogy, I want you to be able to spread the passion to others. When I look at obsession, I look at that as just me to it. When I look at a person who has passion, it's like religion. You're bringing other people into that passion. And I want founders who can be able to really kind of galvanize a team, and we talk about that, building the community around it, and kind of have that passion go to other people as well. So I think both of those, what I love about entrepreneurship and what I love about investing is there's no right or wrong answer. Everything is nuanced. We also saw that when we talked about this conversation in the chat that's going on with Twitter. There are several investors that I know personally that haven't got investment from Twitter, and we saw the examples there. But also too, we've seen where it may not work for certain investors. So I definitely think, what I love about this is there's no right or wrong way, but there is just a different path which you can do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Yes.
Yeah, and I'm just going to point out really quick, Ken Hayes from CTO said, passion and obsession, but not desperation.
We have to highlight Tony's quote. If you can read Tony's quote for the chat, I think that I love that. That's definitely
Tony Stefan, passion gets you into a marriage, devotion keeps you in the marriage. Woo!
That is facts right there.
Dang, that's a good one. Okay, yeah.
I think
all right, back to
like being yourself, right? So it's like if you're not one to express strong emotions, like don't. It will look weird. And if you're more about like the logic and the strategy, the savviness of your idea, like focus on that, and that'll be interesting and inspiring to investors too.
Yeah. Okay, back to do's and don'ts. Do you mail gifts?
Don't do it.
Don't do that.
Yeah. Okay.
Nope.
Creepy.
No.
All right. So what if it's your product though? Do you send your product?
If it's a consumer product and it's kind of relevant and it can be a leave behind. I mean, we have one company in our portfolio that makes a spirit derived from excess whey from farms, and everyone, wants her to leave a sample. Everyone's like, "Where's mine?" And she actually normally doesn't. Like, she'll only do it if she really feels like it's a qualified investor, which I was like, "Good for you." But yeah, unless it's super relevant, no.
Yeah, same. When I was an angel, I would actually have friends buy products from the companies I was thinking about investing in. And the reason I did that is I want to see the experience. I want to see the consumer experience, especially if it's a consumer-based product. And then, once I have the meeting, I would tell them, yeah, that was my friend. I got your product right here. And it would, make the conversation a little bit more robust. But sometimes I used to do that as an investor.
Oh, that's cool. Okay. Last one. Letting your intern take a slide on a pitch. Do or don't?
Don't do it.
I mean, I think we talked about it before. I mean, it really depends on the context and like what it is. And, it's really, I mean, I think it can go both ways, right? It happened to land well with us. It would not have landed well with Judy. So be confident and know what you're doing. And maybe pitching is not a place to gamble.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, I'll be very frank. I haven't hired my interns that I've had before, and I've had them really kind of step up. But again, to what Vanessa said, definitely just depends on the investor. Yeah, definitely. And again, this is why coming to events like this are important. You can learn these little things. So when you get ready to pitch, Judy, you do not have your intern on. So I definitely think, this is good to be able to come to these events and learn these things as well from investors.
Yeah. In my perspective, it has just too high of a risk compared to reward for bringing on an intern. And my goal for the initial conversation is to get to know you and the technology and your vision. If we decide to go deeper, then I try to meet other folks.
All right, so to finish this off, before we end, I thought we would do this, and you can answer if you want to, you don't have to answer, but finish this sentence for me. Funniest thing that ever happened on a pitch. You don't have to name names. You can keep this cloaked.
I think for me, it's funny, because we've been in COVID, I guess I've come to expect anything can happen because anything has happened to me. I mean, I've had my dogs run into my office or to pitch myself. I've had my children, my teenager children literally fighting verbally while I'm pitching. You can hear them in the back. But I think, for me, I think I'm a little bit more lenient now. Like if it was a face-to-face, I probably would be more harder on companies who are pitching when we're face-to-face. But I think since COVID, I've become a little bit more relaxed. I think that this whole experience from the pandemic has been stressful for everyone. So shout out to the folks building mental health startup companies. So you're going to be the superstars in the next couple of years. But I think that, for me, I've been a little bit more lenient when I hear pitches from folks and kind of, take things with a grain of salt.
That's awesome.
I have an answer for the second sentence.
Oh, so move on. Okay, so finish the sentence.
Something for this one.
Okay. Oh, do you have a funny one? Okay, all right. So the worst thing that's ever happened on a pitch.
So I'll share. I mean, honestly, I haven't had too bad of experience, on pitches. Like people generally, like if something is like a rough start in the beginning, it like warms up like throughout the course of the conversation. So really it's like there aren't too many horror stories, where at least I feel like pretty forgiving of like things that happen. But one thing that I could point to that might be one of the worst things in a pitch is when there was a team that contacted us for like an update meeting. So maybe it was inactive fundraising or like very, very early stages of their active fundraising. And they asked us so many questions about what we'd recommend for their business model and their like strategy. Like they asked us so many questions about that, like kind of like the conversation you would want to have with like a trusted advisor or mentor, but like it wasn't the right time or relationship to have that conversation with us. And so we left that meeting with like very little confidence in the management team. Like, you guys don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Try not to communicate that.
Yeah, lesson learned there. All right, well, just want to say thank you to the panels. I'm going to hand it over to Bettina.
Yes, thank you so much. Well, amazing. We love these webinars because we feel there's so much value for our climate tech marketers, for the founders. So thank you so much to everyone for participating. Thank you to our panelists, Judy, Vanessa, and Taj. Thank you to Mel for your excellent moderation. And also thank you to Jasmine, our intern. We didn't bring on the slide on the call, but she's the wizard managing all the tech in the background. So very important. Thank you for that. I have popped in all our LinkedIns in the chat. I'll do that again. As I said, we'll follow up with an email with the slides and the recording and the chat as well. So you get everyone's contact details. And Mel and I, as you know, we run marketing consultancies focused on climate tech. So we also have an offer for anyone who's interested for a free 30-minute consultation to chat through your marketing strategy towards investors. Or if you have problems, challenges around your pitch deck or how you to tell your story, we'd be happy to have a chat with you. And that will also be in the follow-up email. Finally, let me share my screen because we actually do have our next webinar scheduled, which will be how to build a winning climate tech marketing team, which we believe is also on the mind of many founders and climate tech marketers. As you scale and grow, you might have one person, but what's coming next? You need a generalist, you need a specialist. And then where do you find them? Do you look in climate tech? But that might be a small talent pool. So what are the industries where you could look, and how do you find people who are just as passionate about your mission as you are? That will happen in exactly 2 months' time. I will put let me stop sharing. I will put that link in the chat as well. And yeah, so thank you everyone for joining. Multitasking is difficult, so let me do this first. So everyone's LinkedIn plus the option to book the consultation with us, and then sorry, the link for the next meeting will come in the follow-up. I have too many windows open. All right. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thanks, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of the day and then a nice weekend when it gets here. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.